to speak, the honourable member for Edmonton Centre.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to take a moment to talk about this bill, Bill 30, the Mental Health Services Protection Act. Mental health has been a chief focus for me in many ways in my time as an MLA over the last 3.5 years. And so I really appreciate the steps that we've been able to take as a government, and indeed the leadership that the Minister of Health has shown on many fronts, and indeed the former Associate Minister of Health and now member for Calgary, Acadia. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to this bill. I'd like to begin by acknowledging, as others have, the powerful words that were just shared by my colleague from Peace River. Indeed, my sympathy goes out to her. I've known far too many, and still know far too many people, that have lost loved ones because they've been unable to find the help they needed when they needed it, for whatever reason that might be, and unfortunately decided that their pain was too much. So my sympathies are with her, and I thank her for her leadership in bringing forward her private member's bill, which is along the similar lines to a lot of what we're debating here today, in wanting to lay out a patient's bill of rights in accessing mental health supports or help in addressing substance use. And for much the same reasons as we're laying out here, because we want to recognize that those that are seeking those supports and those services deserve to be able to access them in dignity, in safety, free from stigma. And indeed, as this bill lays out, to be able to access them from people that they know when they claim that they are offering a level of professional service, that indeed they have the training and understanding and the qualifications to be able to do so. Now, I wanted to address some of the comments that were made this morning when we were debating this in Committee of the Whole. As I listened to the members, I had several thoughts come to me, and I wanted to comment on a few. So the member for Lacombe-Panoka was speaking and expressing his concerns about limiting choice available to individuals who are seeking help. And he spoke specifically about excluding options in accessing supports for counseling for mental health and addictions. He spoke of his concern that we were going to restrict them only to government-approved services, and the lack of knowledge about the quality or the efficacy of those services that are being provided. And what occurred to me, Madam Speaker, is that, you know, I've spoken openly often about my own struggles with mental health. One of the things I maybe have not spoken about as much is my own challenges with physical health. So for a number of years, I've struggled with severe food intolerance, a number of other symptoms, a number of other issues. I spent a lot of time going to a lot of different doctors, medical doctors, specialists, getting all of the medical tests run. When I exhausted all of those and nobody could provide me with any insider help, then I saw many naturopaths and many doctors that worked in alternative medicine and a whole gamut of other people, because I can tell you, Madam Speaker, when you're in that situation and feeling that kind of desperation, you'll look for any opportunity for help. But the fact is, the fact that I had to go through all of that, and that I ended up finding help through a lot of my own research, and indeed by going outside the system in many respects. Indeed, I ended up finding a naturopath who had an understanding who I could work with, and I've seen a great improvement over the last couple of years as I've worked with him. But the fact is, I am still very glad that that naturopath works with the college and is regulated. You know, I may cut myself and be able to bandage that wound myself. I may be able to get help from a friend or acquaintance who has a little bit of medical knowledge. I could have a sore throat or a pulled muscle. I could have a chronic problem with headaches, and maybe there's an herbal remedy that I might hear about from someone that might help me with that situation. Or I may even be living with chronic pain, diagnosed, and simply looking to an alternative to going on a heavy course of opioids or other painkillers, and instead find help maybe through meditation or mindfulness or group therapy or other things that might help me. But the fact that those other options exist do not preclude the fact that we need to regulate the medical services that are involved and the medical people that are involved in those things. Those things can all exist simultaneously. It is similar with mental health. Now, as I said, I had my own struggles, and through the years, I saw a number of different individuals in looking for that help. Starting out as I did as a young man coming from the faith community, I was sent to see a man who was, I believe, a psychologist. But you know, when I first went to see him, he told me that I was oppressed by a demon and wanted to work with me on that front. And when we finally found no success, then he referred me to a psychiatrist. And I saw that psychiatrist, and I will be honest, I was not an easy person to diagnose. I was not able to communicate very well because I was in a state of pretty dark despair, severe anxiety, without any language of knowing how to communicate what I was experiencing or what was happening to me, because all I knew was what I had lived and grown up with. She diagnosed me with schizophrenia. Didn't tell me that. I found that out later when my family doctor saw the medical records. Tried me on a few different medications, and I'll tell you, there were some pretty freaky side effects that put a lot of fear into me and made it a lot worse in some respects. It was a long journey. That started out in 1991, 1992. And I saw all manner of therapists, counselors, individuals. I can tell you, Madam Speaker, as I said, I recognize the need to have different alternatives for different places where people might be. Somebody who's struggling with alcoholism may benefit from a 12-step program. Some people go cold turkey. They're perfectly fine with working that out on their own. Others need to go into a medical facility and sit down with folks who have the training and the knowledge who are able to provide them with that support. Same with people who are struggling with their mental health. Somebody who's struggling with anxiety or depression, maybe because of experiences growing up or trauma they've experienced, maybe talk therapy is going to be good for them. Maybe for them, sitting down with their imam or their pastor or a yogi is going to give them the ability to talk that through and work those issues out. But for others, they may need professional help. They may need a dedicated program, like I had the honor of participating in the day treatment program at the University of Alberta Hospital, where I got to spend just over 3 months with trained therapists in an approved and accredited program that helped me begin to lay the groundwork for, frankly, what years later, when I would be able to actually start to pick up on some of the things that I heard and was taught in that room and be able to implement them to improve my own life. But it's essential that when people in this incredibly vulnerable state, and let me be clear, Madam Speaker, when you are in this place, you are so vulnerable. When your mind is racing, your emotions are out of control, you have lost all perspective, and you don't know where you can turn, it is incredibly important that folks who are representing themselves as professional therapists, who are offering services, be regulated. That we know that when people are reaching out and asking for help, that the help that they are going to receive from individuals who are representing themselves as such is going to be qualified. Particularly for folks that are going into residential programs, where they are entrusting not themselves only just, where they're entrusting themselves physically in a situation of incredible dependence and indeed trust. We want to be sure that the provision of those services is being done in a safe and regulated manner. So I deeply appreciate the work that the minister has done on this, the consultation that she's had, and indeed recognizing the work that FACT has done. And I remember meeting with the executive director, her name again was Nicole Imgren. And I remember meeting with her in my office and talking with her, and I really appreciate the hard work and advocacy she has done over an extended period. To be clear, Madam Speaker, this was not arrived at overnight. This has been an ongoing conversation for quite some time. And I deeply appreciate when I see folks in the community who take that time and work carefully in their advocacy, reach out to talk to other groups, to build that consensus and come and thoughtfully engage with government about moving forward on these things. The member for Fort McMurray Wood Buffalo this morning, expressed some concerns around the consultations that have been happening, identified a group that he felt had not been heard. I appreciate that that Nicole's organization, Fact Alberta, clarified that indeed they'd actively reached out to that particular group and that members from that group, in fact, sit on the steering committee for Fact Alberta, and so have had some input as part of this. And I do regret that as the member made his tabling today, he seemed to suggest that both myself and the Minister of Health in discussing these things have engaged in unparliamentary language. I would certainly encourage that member that if he feels I used any unparliamentary language in my comments today, that he bring that to the record, or perhaps would consider at the time calling a point of order. But regardless, I recognize that he's done work in the field, that he himself has probably had some traumatic experiences in his work as a paramedic.
True.
And so I can understand the passion that he brings to the table and wanting to ensure that people are helped. But I think we need to be careful in these discussions, Madam Speaker, to be measured in how we're approaching this, because again, I do not think it's unreasonable that we bring in some basic standards, as other jurisdictions have done before us, so that we ensure that the types of services that are being offered to people are clearly identified, that they can clearly know when they are dealing with somebody who is a professional, who has training, who has background, who has education, has schooling. And again, ensuring that as we do so, we leave the room for these other options that indeed need to be available for people. Because I recognize, Madam Speaker, that over the years, we are just starting to get to the point where we recognize that mental health is every bit as important and as necessary as physical health. And because we have not historically had that recognition, we have not built up the same kinds of systems and indeed public coverage, access. Government has largely been absent from the provision of what are really often key medical services that are every bit as important as a person's physical health. And in the time before we began to recognize that importance, indeed, I recognize that other communities have indeed provided that service, and we are incredibly thankful that that has been there, that people have had the opportunity to talk with, peer counselors, that they've had the opportunity to find spiritual support when that is what they need and that is what they're looking for, that organizations have stepped up and provided, counseling on a free or sliding scale basis. It's an incredibly important network of services that we need to have available as we continue to address the issue of mental health, because we recognize the more we talk about it, then the more people recognize the need. And so indeed, we see growing numbers of people trying to access services, and we just cannot keep up with the capacity to address it. So we need to have folks at all different points on the spectrum of services to help provide people with what they need when they need it. But indeed, I think we need to move forward with ensuring that we have a level of services that are clearly identified and as being provided by individuals who have training, who have knowledge, because we do continue to learn. We do continue to find proven therapies. When we get into psychiatry and other areas, there are definitely proven methodologies and approaches that we know are effective. So it's important that we have a layer of services that is protected and regulated. And indeed, the creation of this College of Counseling Therapy is not the last step on the road. This is the first step. And so members that have been expressing some concerns about how this might impact other groups, there is room after the passage of this bill to have that conversation and to sit down and continue to work through regulation as this is established, just as has been done with every other college that has been created in the province. And I recognize that, again, some groups may feel a bit of fear about this change coming in. I can understand that. With change comes some uncertainty. And again, these are groups who've provided important and essential services. But I truly believe, having spoken with some of the folks that have been advocating for this, and I think the opportunity we're going to have to appoint people and see people elected into positions to take on this work, that we have the capacity to do this well and do this right. So this bill is the important first step on that road as we continue to acknowledge the incredible importance of mental health, as we continue to acknowledge the work we need to do to support people who are struggling with addictions in a humane way, with a harm reduction approach that, as my colleague from Peace River noted, is rooted in ending stigma.
Hear, hear. Honourable member, are there any members wishing to speak under 29-2A? The Honourable Member for St. Albert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, like everyone, I'm sure I was just fascinated by what you had to say, or by what the member for Edmonton Centre had to say. So I would love it if he would continue to talk about why this bill is so important, and really sort of impressing on everybody what the actual facts are.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton.
Thank you to the member from St. Albert. I'll just conclude briefly. I was just wrapping up my remarks. So again, as we proceed with this, I think this bill is a very important first step on the road, setting up the structures to ensure that we will have the college that will help determine how we regulate, how we protect. We've had some excellent amendments that have helped ensure that this has the minimum of negative impact on those who provide these services while providing good protection for those who need to access them. So I thank all the members that have shared their thoughts on this. I thank the Minister for bringing this forward, and I look forward to voting in support of this bill. Thank you.